Hi, it's Friday morning. That means another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. And we have, I think, a good one for you today. Hey, Jer, how you doing?
Hey, Dad. I'm pretty good. How about you?
I'm good, although I'm going to need you to help me sort through a few things. A tale of two different sets of numbers, and what uh, what drove this for me was when I saw last night that Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota, three-term congressman, uh, basically who is in agreement with Joe Biden on most things, has decided to challenge President Biden in the primaries. He's too late for Nevada, but he is actually filing for New Hampshire. And what he said really struck me. He said, Joe Biden has done amazing things for this country, but 2024 is not about the past. It's about the future and the time for a new generation. And so to frame this, I wonder, here are the two sets of numbers we're looking at. On one hand, we have 13.2 million jobs and growing since Biden took to the presidency. We have a rate of inflation that had been 9.2%, is down at around 3% annualized now. Yesterday's report showed that quarterly annualized, the gross domestic product for the United States is 4.9%. That is enviable. And then we have a whole list of legislation as well. On the other hand, the other sets of numbers, Biden is still mired in 41% approval rating, much lower on the economy, on foreign policy, and on immigration, three key issues. Against Donald Trump, who I'll remind everybody is facing four indictments, a couple of major civil trials, 91 criminal charges against him, and yet is beating, or at least tied, with President Biden. And the other very baffling thing is even Republicans will tell you that they embarrassed themselves in this recent battle over a Speaker of the House, and ultimately settled on somebody that nobody knows, and frankly, nobody really thinks is going to be around very long, given the real crevasses, that's our word for the day, within the Republican Party. So help me. What's going on here?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, well, again, I always have to put the disclaimer that I haven't voted since 2012 because there aren't any candidates that I like. And I saw a lot of people around me getting um, excited about Trump, and I never bought it. But just because I don't like him and I didn't vote for him doesn't mean that I agree that there are 91 criminal offenses which are legitimate. I think there's a witch hunt, and I think that that's working in his favor, and that's working against Biden, and that's working against Biden because as each day goes on, we find that there's more evidence that Biden has a little bit of a corruption problem himself, a major corruption problem, and that a lot of that was swept under the rug, uh, and that involved certain institutions and agencies. It could have involved some intelligence agencies. It probably did, and it involved the upper echelons of the Department of Justice. So that is just an unfortunate clown show that is rearing its ugly head as hyperpolarization, in which one could argue that Trump looks more like the victim of a system that, of course, he did ask for a lot of it, right? He did create a lot of fanfare and chaos and brought it upon himself. But as you would famously say, there are no good guys here. So there is no good alternative. That's on the political front. Let's get to the economic front. Um, and what you said about all these jobs and lowering inflation and GDP. Well, one would have to believe in those economic indicators. Of course, there are a lot of people who don't believe that the federal government or the BLS or who, off the top of my head, I don't know who tracks the rate of inflation. That they would believe. There are not a lot of people who believe that those are actual numbers. That is to say that while they may pick up the Wall Street Journal or they may see in a headline that inflation is down annually and that jobs are up, they're looking at their receipts, they're looking at their checkbooks, and that is the real economic indicator. How much can I save? How much is my paycheck lasting? And am I better off today or worse off 6 months ago versus a year? Enter a crucial voting block. I would say, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of looking to the future generation. As you quoted Dean Phillips, who said the torch needs to be passed. There's a new generation. It's about the future. So let's talk about 18 to 24-year-old voters and what they're going through. And then I think when we understand what they're going through, it's very clear why they are not behind Biden, and likely why the next age cohort, those in their late 20s and those in their 30s, are probably also not really behind Biden and Bidenomics. Well, what are 18 to 24-year-olds going through? So they're facing the problem of student debt. Let me just tell a brief story that 12 years ago, I had a student in college who told me her tuition. She said her first 2 years were each 38 grand. So let's just say 80 grand right there, room and board. Then her junior and senior year were going to be 60 grand. I was shocked. I said, "Oh my God, you're almost paying $250,000 for a bachelor's degree." I felt terrible that was my reaction because that didn't make her feel good. But that was 12 years ago. So that same higher ed institution, what does that cost now? It is not, even if you owe $40,000 or $50,000, it is not easy to pay that off. And what kind of jobs are people who are 18 to 24 or even 25 to 29 getting? What can they get? Can they get good benefits? Can they get good pay? Most likely not. So they have crippling debt. Now let's go to something that most young people love to do. They love to drive. With interest rates now, and given that 18 to 24-year-olds are not likely to have good credit scores, they're probably looking in subprime territory in terms of a FICO credit card score of below 680, which is not good. And so they're coming into this, and that translates to interest rates for a car payment that would amount to anywhere from 15 to 20%, which translated to monthly payments is looking at $1,000 a month. How can somebody who's in their college years or in their 20s afford, how can somebody in their 40s and 50s afford a car payment that is $1,000 a month? Let's go to rent. Rent on average is, I think the average rent is about somewhere between $1,700 to $1,900 a month. I remember just a short while ago when a typical mortgage payment was under $1,000. Now just a rent is almost double that. So these folks, when we just look at those economic numbers, it's easy how the young are turning away from Biden and Bidenomics. And most certainly, as you would get older into the late 20s and 30s and 40s, they're not really going to be behind Bidenomics either. And I think that's why his numbers are so low. I'll just say one other thing. TIPP, an excellent polling firm, they came out with the latest of some of their index numbers, one of which is financial stress, another which is economic optimism. And looking at that among the 18 to 24-year-old vote, they go back to Biden's presidency, starting with April of 2021. You know, after Biden's first 100 days, give him a start, give him a chance to transition, and the financial stress index was somewhere around 60, which is 10 points above neutral. That was in April of the year 21. This is again among 18 to 24-year-olds. Now it's at 70. So that financial stress index has increased about 10 points. That's not good. Now, if you look at economic optimism, conversely, that was around 60 in April of 2021. That has gone down now to 50 among this cohort. And so I think when we just look at stuff like that, you know, versus what the bureaucrats are churning out and telling us, no, it's okay, it's all good. It's not okay. You have a lost generation that we're potentially looking at, who are entirely going to miss out on what we all grew up as with knowing the American dream. Now, yes, they'll have to shift their expectations, but it's pretty hard in 2024 to see how younger voters are going to really jive with those numbers that are coming out from the BLS, the Federal Reserve, and who else. I mean, they are on the front lines in the economic battlefield.
Okay, I mean, we're right back to where we started from, where we disagree with each other. Okay, I think what you have laid out is perfectly legitimate, and from our polling as well as that of others, we do know the younger you are, the more stressed you are, and financial stress is only part of it, but it's a big part of it. And we also know, however, that rounding it out, about 70% of voters don't want either Trump or Biden. And so I still wonder, you know, what this landscape is going to look like. The election's a year from now. What's it going to look like by spring? Are there going to be some surprises in the primaries? I know Donald Trump is leading by an enormous amount over his closest challengers. And yet, you know, I have learned watching elections over the years that one chink in the armor, just not meeting expectations. I mean, the worst thing politically that could happen to Trump, and not necessarily being on trial, turning around and being on trial again, is if he goes into these primaries with 60% support and comes out of the primaries with 45% support, he has not met expectations. And the discussion starts to focus on who can possibly, you know, who can get some momentum. I think the same thing with Biden. I believe, and we have said before on this podcast, that I believe Biden has made a huge mistake by bypassing Iowa and New Hampshire, at least Iowa and New Hampshire as the first primary and first caucus. Particularly, I think, New Hampshire, because it's written into their state law. And our polling has shown that Democrats and independents there are insulted and angry. And so I recall that in 1968, Lyndon Johnson did not run in the Democratic primary, actually won by a few points, is a write-in candidate against Gene McCarthy, but no one expected Gene McCarthy to do as well as he did. And McCarthy got the media, the money, the momentum, and so on. And that could happen here. The potential for Dean Phillips to embarrass President Biden. I'm struck, though, by this notion that I have been talking about Biden's accomplishments and feeling that they are considerable, no matter which way you cut it. Millions of jobs, low unemployment. Look, those are the same barometric readings that we've always used. And so you compare apples and apples. I do understand, and have written about the levels of anxiety, particularly among young people. But I think we go into this election without any preset notions about what can happen
Yeah.
because um, uh, because expectations really can topple. So I'm going to suggest we watch Dean Phillips closely. I suggest that we watch the Republicans very closely. As you know better than anybody else on this planet, I suggest we watch Bobby Kennedy very closely. And I'm going to add that we look at Cornel West because 2 out of 3 votes that Cornel West gets are African American votes that could go to Joe Biden. The other third, I think, are voters, younger voters of color who probably wouldn't have voted anyway. So I think we have a year from now, things could be really topsy turvy.
Yeah.
Final word.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. I've always noticed in this long year before election day that there's a lot of seesawing, and that a lot of folks have their moments. As you mentioned, Kennedy today is still at a fifth. Harvard Caps poll had him commanding 21% of the electorate. A USA Today poll had him 22. We had him last month at 19. There's still a
Before
year
his announcement. Before his announcement.
before his announcement, correct? But I mean, getting back, to young voters and the economic, metrics. I mean, the fact of the matter is that a lot of these formulas change over time. They're not consistent. Um, and it's my strong belief that they are masking a lot of the true pain. You hear 13 million jobs created, and you say, "Wow," but they never tell you, and you have to go bury into the reports what kind of jobs they are. What are they paying? Most of them are part-time jobs. They're temp jobs. That's not success. I mean, look, I had a debate or a friendly discussion before COVID with somebody who was a boomer who was talking about the differences between now and then, and he said, look, we boomers, we went through the 70s. Oil shot up, gasoline shot up. I said, yeah, but you entered the workplace not saddled in debt. You didn't have credit card debt. You could still buy a house even though the interest rates shot up. You could park your money in a savings account and collect, I don't know, 10, 13% interest or 8 or 9, whatever. People today don't have, they don't really have those options. I mean, there are accounts now with higher interest rates, but people are saddled with more debt, credit card debt, car loan debt, higher education debt. I mean, we have a really big problem. And then inflation hasn't gone away. You can show me whatever indicator, that's saying that annualized it's down. The fact of the matter is, every month, most people are looking at different things that they're buying. Not everything, but some new item has gone up 10, 15, 20%. And so, look, this isn't doom or gloom. It's just saying, I don't think 18 to 24-year-olds have ever been more stressed out today, with an obvious reason. Because in the past, there was an acceptance, there was a standard, there was when you finished college, you were going to be able to settle down and get a home and get a job, a decent job, and you could move and find a decent job, and there were jobs. But these are temp jobs that we're talking about being created, and the inflation is pretty crippling. So I don't want to rule out and say that this is normal, because it's not. I don't see any precedent for it. So with all of that said, I would just say, look to the young vote, and look at the candidates and what they are doing and saying to try to appeal to them, and who can come up with the program or the talking points that can get them in their corner.
I will, and we are, because we track the young vote, and we should devote an entire podcast to it, with some granularity. Well, okay, good discussion,
Yeah.
and good going. So I'll be seeing you very soon, but
Yeah.
we'll be seeing you on the screen next week.
Take care. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.